Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Drug Cultures. I'm Sky Hawthorne. This is my show. All opinions expressed here are my own, as is all music. And as always, nothing I say on the podcast should be taken as medical advice. I'm not a physician. I do not and will not recommend that anybody take any drug for any reason. All content produced here is for the purposes of education, entertainment, and occasionally harm reduction. So this is an episode that I've been wanting to do for a while, and it's about Venezuela. Some of my more active listeners have probably noticed that I haven't put out an episode in several months, and that's largely because I have had the incredible opportunity to write about Venezuela and our revamped war on drugs for various outlets, including the folks over at Lucid News. Shouts out as always. I wanted to get this episode out as quickly as possible because, as you all certainly know by now, America just invaded Venezuela in an illegal regime change war undertaken by our ostensibly anti-war president, Donald Trump. Trump has been telegraphing this move for months now. He's been attacking Venezuelan speedboats, claiming they're drug traffickers and narco-terrorists, even though all evidence points to the fact that most of these are clearly just fishing boats. But on the night of January 2nd, 2026, the U.S. war machine took this campaign to another level. U.S. helicopters launched missile strikes on targets across the country, including the Fuerte Tiuna military base in the capital city of Caracas, where Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife were sheltering. Special forces abducted Maduro and his wife, taking them onto the warship USS Iwo Jima before flying them to the United States, where they will ostensibly stand some sort of trial. As of January 7th, the death toll of this invasion sits at 80. Many of these people are innocent civilians, and the known targets included a civilian apartment building in a Caracas suburb, as well as a major scientific research center. Some of the casualties are also Cuban soldiers stationed in Caracas to defend Maduro, and Trump is now openly musing about wanting Cuba to fall. The focus of this episode is not going to be the details of this invasion or the potential regional war that's to come, because the situation is rapidly evolving, and by the time you're listening to this, anything factual I could say about it is going to be hopelessly out of date. Instead, I want this episode to act as a broader look into why America is going after Venezuela so hard, and the role that drugs play both in the Venezuelan economy and in the consent manufacturing that the Trump State Department has been doing for months, years even, to lay the groundwork for this war. Now, am I going to sit here from my comfy chair in America and defend the government of Nicolas Maduro? Yes, that is what I'm going to do. But that doesn't mean I think he's a good person. That doesn't mean I think he actually won all of his elections, and it certainly doesn't mean that I'm going to pretend he wasn't corrupt. The patronage system in the elite ranks of the Venezuelan government has been on full display for years. But there's a reason the United States has been trying to oust Maduro for a decade, and it isn't because of any human rights abuses. It isn't because of election fraud. After all, America has allied itself with the majority of the world's dictatorships, including countries like Saudi Arabia that don't even have the pretense of democratic elections. And it certainly isn't because of his alleged involvement in the drug trade. We want him gone because Maduro, like his predecessor Hugo Chavez, has presided over a socialist government that has been a thorn in the side of American regional hegemony for more than 20 years. This episode is really a sort of sequel to episode 9 of this podcast, which I did a year ago about Captagon in Syria. And you should give that episode a listen if you haven't already, because there's so many parallels. Both Syria and Venezuela are countries whose involvement in the drug trade was, or is, intimately connected to the crippling impact of American sanctions on a political leader who has refused to play ball with our agenda. This is Drug Cultures. We'll be right back. Let's go back to a few months ago, September 2nd, 2025, when Trump posted a video on Truth Social of an airstrike on a boat that he claimed was a Venezuelan drug smuggling vessel. More recently, we found out that there was a double tap strike on the survivors clinging to the wreckage of the ship, a war crime. Everything about that strike, and the dozens of similar strikes that would follow it, was brazenly illegal. Even if the boat did contain drug traffickers, those are civilians, not enemy combatants. But this is all part of a campaign on the part of this government, the current Trump regime, to revitalize the war on drugs and turn it into an actual hot war. In Trump's political project, drugs are something that can be framed as weapons, and trafficking drugs can be portrayed not merely as trafficking weapons, but using them on innocent Americans. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who, even if they don't personally support Trump, have bought into his framing on the issue, hook, line, and sinker. Partly, this is because of the emotional weight of the overdose crisis, which still kills nearly 100,000 Americans annually, not including alcohol deaths, which brings the number even higher. It doesn't take much effort to convince people to see drug trafficking as a weapon that powerful foreign adversaries can wield against America. Trump has gone on the record to say that every strike on one of these boats will save 25,000 American lives. It should probably go without saying that there's absolutely no evidence for that number. It doesn't even really pass the arithmetic test. But a lot of people who may not fully support Trump's attacks are nonetheless parroting the idea that Venezuela's drug trade is putting Americans at risk and somehow contributing to the overdose crisis. And this is really not the case. The vast majority of overdose deaths are from synthetic opioids like fentanyl, which can be a very useful drug when used in a medical setting, but is extremely dangerous when taken recreationally, very deadly often, especially when the user doesn't even know it's there at all. And the vast majority of that fentanyl entering the US drug supply has never, at any point in its supply chain, had anything to do with Venezuela. That fentanyl is made cheaply by clandestine chemists in Mexico, often working for criminal groups like the Sinaloa cartel, whose leader El Chapo ran his drug empire with violent authority. Now, the solution is not to go bomb the Sinaloa cartel either. Somebody else will just make the fentanyl, innocent people will get hurt, and a nation will have its sovereignty violated. The only real solution is to create a safe, accessible, and regulated drug supply, which in today's cultural environment will unfortunately be a tough sell. But Trump is not bombing Sinaloa. He's going after Venezuela, a country that no credible expert has ever accused of dealing fentanyl. Venezuela does not produce any significant quantity of narcotics, with the exception being some coca growing and cocaine production along the western border it shares with Colombia. Venezuela does act as a transit country for a fairly sizable quantity of cocaine, and to a lesser extent marijuana, originating from Colombia. The border is porous between the two countries. Secret roads and clandestine airports allow smugglers the ability to cross without detection. And it's here where people accused Maduro, probably with some degree of truth, of turning a blind eye to or even encouraging people to take bribes from drug smugglers. I don't doubt that many Venezuelan officials are doing business with drug dealers. Is that corruption? Absolutely. Is Maduro directly involved? Would not surprise me. But fundamentally, what we're talking about here is cocaine dealing. And I've known a few people who had unhealthy relationships with cocaine, and here's the hard truth. None of them so much as blamed it on their dealer, and certainly none of them blamed it on Nicolas Maduro. But the Trump administration has basically made the claim that this network of corrupt officials is actually a terrorist organization, Cartel de los Soles, which means Cartel of the Suns, because of the sun insignia that Venezuelan officials have on their uniform. In November, just a couple of months ago, Secretary of State Marco Rubio officially designated them a terrorist organization because they turn a blind eye to drug dealing, I guess. There's nothing you can say about Cartel de los Soles that wouldn't also be true about the CIA. By the way, most of the drugs that pass through Venezuela are exported into the Caribbean and sold through Europe, not America. American cocaine is usually transported the other direction, from Colombia, either over water by way of the Pacific or over land through Central America. And again, am I saying that we should go to war with foreign drug trafficking gangs? No, I think that's terrible policy that, even if you're looking at it through a cold, hard, America first lens, would be completely ineffective at keeping Americans safe. But Trump also literally just pardoned the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was convicted of corruption and drug trafficking in 2022. Hernandez allegedly worked with cartels, including Sinaloa, to allow safe passage of cocaine and other drugs through his country. When it comes to fentanyl trafficking, it's objectively much easier to make the case that Hernandez was involved than Maduro. After all, Hernandez was accused of taking bribes directly from El Chapo. And he was just beginning a 45-year prison sentence when Trump pardoned him. Trump pardoned Hernandez for a few simple reasons. One, Hernandez is right-wing and was a Trump ally while in office. And two, Trump does not actually care at all about drugs. Of course, he has governed as a drug warrior, and he has fondness for guys like former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte, who executed suspected drug dealers in the street. But I really don't think that's because Trump cares personally about drugs. I think he just likes the big, strong guys, you know? He likes authoritarians, and authoritarians around the world have used drugs as an excuse for their authoritarianism for decades. But Trump doesn't care about drug use. He definitely doesn't care about the overdose crisis. He probably regards people who die of opioid overdoses with the same contempt he has for the homeless, or for a lot of people in his own base, honestly. I actually think he might be kind of interested in drugs. He was on Theo Vaughn's podcast over the summer before the 2024 election, and just so you know, I listen to a lot of Theo Vaughn, so you don't have to. Anyways, at one point, Theo was recounting his own experience with cocaine addiction before he got sober, and Trump seemed earnestly curious. It was actually probably the most human and endearing he's ever seemed. The old man still has rock-solid political instincts sometimes. So if he loves authoritarians, and he doesn't really care about drugs, why has he made it his mission, seemingly with alarming success, to topple Maduro? The answer is something you've probably heard 1,000 times before, and it's almost disappointing in its simplicity. He wants cheap access to Venezuela's natural resources. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves of any country on Earth, and American companies want access to that oil. They also have a smaller but still non-trivial amount of gold, but oil is really the dominant industry in the country, and much of Hugo Chavez's initial socialist vision for Venezuela was one where the country's oil wealth could be leveraged to reduce poverty and build social programs in healthcare, education, literacy, and the like. This is what the so-called Bolivarian Revolution, named after Latin American revolutionary Simón Bolívar, was supposed to be all about. And for a while, it worked. Food insecurity plummeted. Low-income housing became substantially more affordable. And this wasn't done alone. Much was done alongside Cuba, which also lived under the blockade imposed by America, the regional hegemon, and its allies. Cuba has always had a remarkably excellent medical system for a country as poor as it is, and under Chavez, Venezuela was essentially sharing its oil with Cuba in exchange for their doctors and medical expertise. Infant mortality in Venezuela plummeted. As much as it can ever be a good time to be poor anywhere, the Chavez era was a good time to be poor in Venezuela. Of course, as we all know, This era did not last. The problem with chaining your economy to a single industry, like Venezuela did with oil, is that price shocks in that one industry can end up crashing your economy. That's exactly what happened shortly after Chavez's death, several years into the Maduro government. Venezuela had long relied on developing economies like China and India to import its oil, and a reduction in demand from these countries, combined with an increase in supply from other exporters such as the United States, hit the country hard. The leaders of the Bolivarian Revolution had made a horrible miscalculation. Their prioritization of social programs, while incredibly important, had been conducted at the expense of any sort of economic diversification. So when it couldn't sell oil at the prices it had for decades, the economy imploded. What followed is an economic crisis that is widely understood to be worse than the Great Depression, triggering a wave of mass migration from the country and years of hyperinflation. Often left out of the equation is that price shocks were not totally natural. Starting in 2015 and intensifying over the coming years, the Obama and subsequent Trump administrations used the economic instability and the violent military crackdowns on Venezuelans who protested the Maduro government as an excuse to place crippling sanctions on Venezuelan's state-run oil company PDVSA, artificially keeping the price of Venezuelan oil low by making it extremely difficult for them to sell it at all. Toppling the socialist government has been a goal of the United States since Chavez won his election. Because there's money to be made in the extraction of Venezuela's natural resources, and because the country has allied itself with communist Cuba, America has tried to use every single excuse to topple this government. Through sanctions, the United States knew it could intensify the deep destabilization that was already coursing through Venezuelan society, continuing to cripple the economy until things reached a breaking point and the Maduro government could be toppled. And this very nearly happened in 2019, when the United States, alongside many countries around the world, declared Juan Guaido to be the president of Venezuela. But state institutions remained loyal to Maduro, and Guaido ended up basically being a paper tiger, so America had to come up with a new way to knock Maduro down. Enter drugs. In 2020, after it became abundantly clear that Juan Guaido was not going to be the president of Venezuela, prosecutors in New York and Miami indicted Maduro, as well as a number of other Venezuelan officials, on charges of drug trafficking. The indictment alleged that as the state oil industry collapsed in the face of ongoing sanctions, Maduro only managed to hold on to power through the drug trade, keeping officials loyal to him by lining their pockets with cocaine money. And this may be true to some extent. It's very similar to what happened in Syria, where the manufacture and trade of a stimulant called Captagon became essential to the functioning of the Bashar al-Assad government, as civil war and sanctions decimated the country's legitimate economy. But it's also just so transparently a bid by American courts to legitimate a future regime change operation, like the one that just happened. The day after U.S. Special Forces attacked Caracas and abducted Maduro and his wife, a new indictment against Maduro, his wife, and alleged co-conspirators was unsealed. The indictment, filed the previous month, makes basically the same charges as the 2020 indictment, but some of the details are worth a close examination anyway. Because Nicolas Maduro's son, known as the Prince, or Nicolasito, is also indicted, and he's indicted on some very specific charges. I'm going to read a bit from the indictment because it definitely triggered my bullshit radar. So here we go. Between approximately 2014 and 2015, a captain in the Venezuelan National Guard on Margarita Island, Venezuela, coordinated hotels, transportation, women, and food for visits by Venezuelan officials, including Nicolasito, the defendant, who visited Margarita Island up to twice monthly. Nicolasito would arrive on a Falcon 900 plane, owned by Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA, that's PDVSA. Before leaving the island, the plane would be loaded, sometimes with the assistance of armed sergeants, with large packages wrapped in tape that the captain understood were drugs. Nicolasito was present while the PDVSA plane was loaded and, on one occasion, stated that the plane could go wherever it wanted, including the United States. So, this indictment is alleging that Nicolas Maduro's son would fly to a gorgeous tropical island off the coast of Venezuela twice monthly on a plane owned by the state-run oil company, have sex with prostitutes, and then leave the island on the same oil plane carrying packages he knew to be drugs. Now, I don't doubt that Maduro's son was lounging on an island getting laid and doing drugs. That's a pretty universal pastime for the elite children of corrupt world leaders. We've got Nicolasito at home, and their names are Hunter Biden and Donald Trump Jr. But do they really expect me to believe that the president's son was openly using a plane owned by PDVSA to manage day-to-day drug trafficking operations? Because there's two possibilities. Either Maduro and his family are comically stupid to be getting their hands dirty so directly, or this is a calculated attempt to delegitimize PDVSA. And given everything that Trump has been saying openly in the last few days, I'm inclined to believe the latter. Maduro's alleged role in drug trafficking is the excuse that Trump and Rubio and Hegseth have used the last few months to bomb fishing boats with impunity. And it's also the excuse they've used to kidnap Maduro himself. But if they can implicate the entirety of Venezuela's state-run oil industry in drug trafficking, that just might be the cover they need to launch a broader war against Venezuela. Because so much remains uncertain right now. Maduro's in New York, awaiting some sort of trial, but his former vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, is now the acting president and is maintaining an official position of loyalty to Maduro and the Bolivarian Revolution. Trump, meanwhile, has been talking about how the United States is going to run Venezuela and allow American companies into the country to do business and sell Venezuelan oil. He said the other day, "We're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground, and that wealth is going to the people of Venezuela and people from outside Venezuela that used to be in Venezuela, and it goes also to the United States of America in the form of reimbursement for the damages caused us by that country." And while the Maduro government is basically still in power in Venezuela, minus Maduro himself, Trump has indicated that if they don't comply with his vision, there will be a second and much larger attack. Ladies and gentlemen, there we have it. Our anti-war president. He just cares so much about protecting Americans from drug overdoses. He cares so much that he will literally pardon the former Honduran president who worked directly with El Chapo. And he cares so much about being anti-war that he's promising Shock and Awe 2.0, the Caracas edition. Do I know what's going to happen from here on out? Absolutely not. There was some speculation that Trump would install Nobel Peace Prize winner and Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado as the next president. But it also seems like he's jealous that she won the Nobel Peace Prize and probably won't let that happen. What a psychotic person, by the way, Machado. I'm glad she pissed Trump off. She has been trying to topple Venezuela for decades, was a big friend of George W. Bush and all those neocons. I can't believe she's managed to rebrand herself as a champion of democracy. Because during the, I think it was 2002 coup against Hugo Chavez's government, she literally signed the Carmona Decree, which literally dismantled all of Venezuela's democratic institutions. That is, until mass protests brought Chavez back into power a mere 48 hours later, and everyone who signed that decree decided to quickly pretend it hadn't happened. It's like if somehow one of the January 6th insurrectionists rebranded themselves as a pro-democracy advocate and ran for president in 20 years. So, yeah, no idea what's going to happen next. It's been reported that Trump told oil executives about this invasion before he told Congress. Doesn't that say a lot? America has implemented a full blockade of Venezuelan oil. Technically, it's just a blockade of sanctioned ships, but this essentially gives the military carte blanche to seize any boats carrying oil from PDVSA. Russia is obviously not too happy about this, especially since the Navy and Coast Guard just seized a Russian ship for carrying Venezuelan oil. Is this the start of World War III? I was wrong when I said that about the war with Iran over the summer. I certainly hope I'm wrong again. Anyways, I'm so happy to be doing an episode of Drug Cultures again. I wish it were under better circumstances. Maybe the next episode will be a fun one. It'll be episode 20, so for episode 10 we did the catnip episode. Maybe we'll do something a little bit more lighthearted for the next episode. Who knows? Until then, you've been listening to Drug Cultures. Stay tuned. As always, if you enjoyed what you heard, give us a follow on x.com, the everything app. My Twitter handle is @drugculturespod. Give the show a follow on Instagram at consciousness_cultures, or shoot me an email at drugculturespodcast@gmail.com. If you have any questions, think I got anything wrong, have an idea for an episode or a guest you'd like to hear from in the future, I'm always all ears. Hit me up.